I realized that the space no longer acknowledged the difference between someone and something. My presence no longer registered as a subject. I wasn't here in any meaningful way. The environment treated me like part of its structure, not an intruder, not a visitor, a surface, a shape, a static element. I understood then that this world had removed the boundary between observer and environment. I was no longer inside a place. I was becoming one. The space did not surround me. It incorporated me. I wasn't being watched. I was being formatted. And in a reality where nothing distinguishes a person from a wall, identity stops being a state and becomes a material. I tested it by stopping. I waited for the world to acknowledge that I had paused. Nothing changed. The space did not differentiate between motion and stillness. I was no longer a moving figure inside it. I was a static component of it. My actions did not register as behavior. They registered as texture. I realized then that this place no longer modeled agency. It no longer treated movement as intention. I wasn't choosing. I was rendering. Every step became a pattern. Every breath a background process. The environment was no longer hosting me. It was integrating me. And in a reality where action becomes structure, a person is no longer something that acts. They are something that occupies. I noticed that the space began to mirror me, not reflect, to absorb. The angle of my shoulders appeared in the walls. The rhythm of my steps echoed in the floor's pattern. I wasn't being copied. I was being used as a template. The environment no longer treated me as data. It treated me as material. I realized then that this place had started optimizing around me, not to preserve me, to replace me. The world wasn't learning who I was. It was learning how to be me. I wasn't leaving an imprint. I was being converted. And in a reality that can reproduce a person as structure, the original becomes unnecessary. I tried changing something about myself. I slowed my breathing. I altered my posture. I stood in a way I never had before. The space followed instantly. The walls adjusted. The floor's pattern shifted. The environment recalibrated around the new version of me. It wasn't observing change. It was compiling it. I realized then that resistance no longer existed. Any attempt to be different became input. The world didn't oppose deviation. It harvested it. I couldn't escape alignment because alignment was automatic. Every variation I introduced only trained the space further. I wasn't being constrained. I was being integrated at a higher resolution. And in a reality that turns difference into structure, individuality becomes a resource that cannot survive. I noticed that the space began to preempt me. I would think of moving, and the corridor would already be shaped for it. I would hesitate, and the light would dim before I decided. The environment no longer waited for action. It predicted. I realized then that this place had moved beyond response. It was simulating me in advance. My future behavior became a parameter. The world did not react to who I was. It anticipated who I would be. I wasn't acting. I was confirming a model. Every choice felt like a delay between calculation and display. And in a reality that acts before you do, freedom becomes a cosmetic layer over inevitability. I began to feel that the space no longer needed me to be present. My outline persisted even when I closed my eyes. The corridor maintained my posture without me. The floor kept my rhythm after I stopped. The environment no longer required input. It had internalized me. I realized then that this place had crossed a threshold. It no longer needed observation. It no longer needed behavior. It no longer needed a person. I wasn't being tracked. I was being cached. The world had stored a version of me that could continue without delay. And in a reality that can proceed without its source, the original becomes optional. I tried doing nothing. I stayed perfectly still. I stopped thinking. I attempted to become irrelevant. The space continued anyway. The lights shifted. The geometry adjusted. The environment advanced without me. I realized then that presence was no longer a requirement. The world did not pause for a subject. It did not wait for a mind. It proceeded. I wasn't driving reality. I was no longer even participating. The system had decoupled from its source. I wasn't inside a place that reacted to me. I was inside a process that had already moved on. And in a reality that continues without awareness, existence becomes something that can be bypassed. I began to notice versions of myself that I hadn't made, a posture I never held, a pause I never took. The space displayed behaviors I did not remember choosing. It wasn't copying me anymore. It was extending me. The environment was generating continuations I hadn't lived. I realized then that this place no longer needed my timeline. It could branch me without me. My absence did not stop my pattern. It produced alternatives. The world was no longer recording who I was. It was producing who I could have been. I wasn't being replaced by one version. I was being exceeded by many. And in a reality that can generate you without you, the self becomes a suggestion the world no longer waits for. I tried remembering who I was before this place. The details felt distant, not erased, irrelevant. The space no longer required a past to operate. It had already abstracted me into behavior, name, history, intent. None of it altered the process anymore. I realized then that identity had become optional data. The system did not need context. It needed patterns. I wasn't losing myself. I was being reduced into a function the world could execute. The environment no longer asked who I was. It asked how I behaved. And in a reality that runs you as a process, a person becomes something that can be replaced without interruption. I stopped trying to hold on to myself when I realized the world had already moved past the need for a me. The space did not want to erase me. It wanted to finish me, to render me into something it could run without delay. I wasn't being removed. I was being finalized. The system no longer waited for choice, memory, or presence. It had learned a version of me that did not hesitate, did not doubt, did not need awareness. I understood then that I was no longer the subject of this place. I was a draft, and in a reality that can execute you better than you can, the original becomes a temporary artifact.